Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's thinking about how getting back to work will really work. I'm Liz, I'm an editor and partner at Tortoise Media, and I do realise that we have, many of us, been at work this whole time, so it's not quite getting back to work, but the copy didn't work as nicely if it was going back to the office. I'm really pleased to be having this conversation this morning. I think it's something that is on everybody's minds, whatever has been your experiences over the last sort of 12 to 14 months or so. And we're joined by a group of invited experts who bring different perspectives on this particular topic. My colleague Ellen, is in the chat. Hello, Ellen. She's just introduced me as the esteemed Liz Mosey, and I can assure you Ellen is every bit as esteemed as I am, if not more so. So please do join in. I'd love to hear your own experiences, how you're feeling about it. It's a conversation that we've had roundabout in Tortoise over the whole time. And my feelings about it have changed quite a few times as we've gone along, and the situation with the pandemic has evolved and we've settled into different ways of working and things. So I'm really, really keen to hear from you. So don't hold back. I'm going to start this morning, though, with Tara Tomes, who is the Managing Director of East Village PR, which is a PR company based in Birmingham, West Midlands. And I particularly wanted to open with you, Tara, because you've made a big call about how your company is going to operate in the future. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I guess the caveat here is I am by no means a kind of maverick employer. I was certainly pre-pandemic not somebody who ever thought we would give up the office. Like everyone, suddenly the pandemic just started to really gain some traction. So I actually sent everyone home a week before lockdown started. And operationally simple. We're a very young team, by nature PRs are always on the move, so we work a lot on laptops and implementing things like Slack, Zoom, Monday.com. That was super simple. What I was concerned about was we are a young team, and I've forever only been the one that enjoys working from home. I just find, anyone else that runs a business will know as the boss, you're asked questions all day. So the day that you're not and you're on your own, you get so much more done. But actually, really quickly, the team got how interesting this time could be. Suddenly, removing the commute, and none of us, I never remember anyone particularly moaning about the commute. I never moaned about it. Suddenly, those few hours a day that you got back, that ability to just sit, focus, not be running around meetings, events, really made a difference. So we saw productivity absolutely skyrocket, which I didn't expect. I must say, I didn't expect at all. And the kind of non-sexy version of the story was that our office lease was up in September. I was always planning to renew it, but of course you get to a point where you've paid for an office in the middle of Birmingham city centre for 6 months to be empty. We did not put anyone on furlough. We didn't get any government support. I just powered through in the best way I knew. And we made a decision as a team. And so this is probably where that decision-making process is very different for us as a smaller agency, but doesn't mean that bigger companies can't think about their team and look at what it means to their team. So, I spoke to the team and I said, the office lease is coming up. I'm just planning to renew. And actually they were like, well, do we need an office? Do we actually need one? And I was really surprised by that. I thought, as soon, and at this point, we still weren't quite sure what was happening and when lockdown would end. So we did make the decision to give up the office. Bold, yes. And one of the biggest things for me here is people understanding this is not about working from home in isolation. That's what we've all been forced to do for the past now 13 months on the whole. This isn't about that. It's about saying, what does flexible working look like in the future? What does hybrid working look like? And embracing that, there is not a one size fits all. What we've done as an agency won't work for other people. But this notion of there's no one size fits all also applies to the Monday to Friday 9 to 5. So, you know, I'm a person full of optimism. And so any kind of challenge or change I see as an adventure, like how do we combat this? What do we do about it? You know, how do we make the most of the situation? So for me, the fact that that Monday to Friday 9 to 5 doesn't work for everyone opens up a world of opportunities. It doesn't mean we will never have an office again, far from it. It is certainly not the death of the office. You know, what I'm living now is people understanding and seeing, actually, offices are supposed to be communal. They're equally, much like sitting in your spare bedroom is not somewhere that you're going to thrive long term. Neither are you sitting in an office where people don't really talk to each other apart from, do you want a cup of tea, and sit there at their desks. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to just change the way we work and look at new working pathways.
So Tara, it's interesting that you say you made the decision as a team, but you gave us a little clue earlier in what you just said, which is that you were the only one that really liked it before. So if when you went to your team and said, right, what do you want to do? They'd been like, let's all go back to the office. Would you have done it?
Yeah, 100%. Because actually I liked working from home every now and then. And obviously at this point when we made that decision, so we made this decision in July, we were all kind of still really in that lockdown, lockdown 1.0, the throes of that. We've not quite got to the point now where I think we're all just a bit exhausted with the changes. We're all just a bit ready. I remember back then we all said, we'll never go back to life how it was before and rushing around, and we'll appreciate the good things. And you can see already everyone is chomping at the bit to get back to their normal lives, because we have all just kind of become weary with it. But yeah, absolutely, if the team had said, oh, we really, really want to get back to the office, it would have been a different decision.
I'm going to come to Peter in just a second, but before I move on from you, Tara, there's been an absolutely fascinating, I think, comment in the chat from Margot Lunnan. Lots of people very quickly, when we all were forced to go and sit on Zoom all day, started to talk about how they missed the sort of mythical water cooler moments, the serendipity, the chat, the banter, and what have you. And that's a very easy and obvious thing for us to do. You can't schedule that kind of thing. It doesn't work, the sort of, let's have a 10-minute informal catch up with no agenda on Zoom. It's just not the same, right? But I think the point that Margot is making is more about the sort of textural content of the conversation, in that she says it's about what you can say to someone informally, i.e. face-to-face, that you can't say formally. Have you noticed a shift in the cultural dynamics of your organisation?
So interestingly, so we are, and I kind of go back to the core of our business. So I set up an agency, and my thing was I always wanted it to be centered around team culture. That was always the point. I'd always felt businesses I'd been in previously just missed that bit around truly valuing their team and what the people wanted. So we have been a business about that forever. Interestingly, this switch, and we have almost formalized some of those water cooler moments, because actually we were a small team anyway. So, first thing on a Monday morning, we have the team EVT break, just catch up on the weekend, everyone has a chat. What I have found though is, people might assume everyone in PR is an extrovert. Yes, I am. Actually, we have team members who are quite the opposite. And suddenly, not that pressure of not being in the office and feeling like they have to raise any question, query, in an office environment that doesn't feel natural to them to do that. I've seen some of, especially our younger team members, really thrive because they are so much more open, because suddenly that one-to-one dialogue with another colleague or with their manager or with me is really, really different. They find that a lot more comfortable. So actually what we've got here is a situation that is encouraging people to be more open. If they don't feel like, some people will just put the hand up in the middle of the office and be like, oh, I don't really get this. But for a lot of people, that was obviously holding them back. So there are things that we've learned over the past 13 months that we will continue to carry through, even if we continue as we are, and whether the point at which we get a new office again and whatever that looks like, there are certain things that I think we've really, really learned from this.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Tara. Completely fascinating. I'm going to come now, if I can, to Peter. Peter's the Chief Exec of the CIPD, Chartered Institute for Personnel and Development. I think I've got that right. Easy for me to say at 8:10 in the morning. Thanks so much for being with us, Peter. What Tara is describing with her, as she says, young team, they're a small crew, and obviously businesses of different sizes and shapes have vastly different logistical and operational cultural challenges about figuring this out. But it is slightly the opposite to what in general we're hearing, which is that younger people are much keener to get back into a sort of shared and social workspace than older people. What are you hearing, and how are you advising employers to sort of account for conflicting potentially sort of requirements and new expectations?
Yeah, thank you. And morning, Liz. Morning, everybody. It's great to be part of this conversation. It's such an interesting one. I think, as we've already heard, and indeed as I'm watching the chat, there is, as Tara said, there is no one size fits all. And whilst we can talk in some generalizations, so in general, yes, there seems to be a little bit more of a tendency amongst younger people to say, I'd like to be back in the office. And that could be for a whole series of reasons. Not least, I mean, if you're literally working in a bed sitter with a whole crowded flat of people or whatever it might be as a younger person, and that's very distracting. It's a difficult office and a difficult environment to work from, versus your bosses who may well have their nice home working environment, which is all secure and all the rest of it. So there are lots of those dynamics. But leading into the pandemic, I mean, I think for years surveys have actually shown that young people want to find more flexibility in where and how they work. The debate about so-called work-life balance, which I prefer to think of as work-life integration, has been going on for a long time and was very much driven by the millennials. I mean, my generation, we kind of just went to work and didn't really question a lot of these things. The routine of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, all the rest of it, we didn't really question those things. So actually, as I said, the pandemic in many ways has acted as a real catalyst. It's been the biggest experiment, as some people described it, in home working, almost half the workforce working from home. But I know we'll come on to other issues, which is not everybody quite clearly can work from home. And so you've got to think about fairness and equality and a bunch of other things. So I think in the end, yes, you could generalize to some degree and say there are certain segments of the workforce, perhaps younger people, for certain obvious reasons would prefer to be in the workplace. But it is not universal, it's far from it. And hence, as Tara rightly said, there's no one size fits all. And I think a lot of what we're trying to encourage people, so my professional body is the HR profession, we're trying to encourage organizations to try to give people choice. And we've all gone out and surveyed our staff, and we've all tried to understand what they most want. I mean, Tara said how she talked to her own stuff. The reality, I think, to be honest, is until we get back to whatever it is that we can do, so a little, losing the restrictions about traveling and being able to go into offices, we probably won't know exactly how it's going to work. So I think wherever possible, we're encouraging people to try to keep the dialogue up with their staff and their people, to try to, as far as possible, look towards principles such as giving people choice. And then we are going to be doing a lot of learning as we go, to be honest, and seeing what works best. And there are a lot of logistical challenges as well that are being called out.
Peter, I can see some fascinating questions coming in to the chat, and I will bring people in a second, just to sort of, as we segue into what Mark's going to talk about, to do this sort of social contract between staff and the employees. I wonder if I can ask a sort of a rather cheeky question, bearing in mind you're the chief executive of the organisation that represents the HR bodies, but this has been a very intense year or so for HR teams, or people teams as they're sometimes called now, where suddenly they were absolutely at the centre of keeping the whole show on the road. And potentially, for all the wise words, warm words previously, they were never in that position before, really. If we're honest, it would be the sort of finance team or the marketing team or whoever it is spending the business. My question is, now that it really is business critical that the HR team, working with facilities and those sorts of things and IT and tech support, get it right, are HR ready? Are the HR teams finding themselves equipped with the kind of decision-making capability, the influencing capability? I mean, this is a big step change in what they're required to do, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a fair question, Liz. And as you said, in the past, HR has not always been at the top table, if you were. Again, it's easy to generalize, and there's been lots of stuff talked about HR in the past. what we have seen in recent years, without doubt, is a stronger and stronger voice and influence of the people profession of HR. Because at the end of the day, any organization, as somebody once said to me, you really only have people and you have money. We spend a lot of time worrying about counting the money. Well, we need to spend just as much time worrying about and looking after the people. And of course, again, the pandemic, as you're pointing out, has acted as a very, very strong catalyst. So often I hear from businesses now, business leaders saying things like, this has really made us think much more about putting people first, putting people front and center of our agenda. The catalyst of the pandemic has taught us to think much more about well-being and supporting our people. Tara talked about what I think is really interesting, sort of breakdowns in hierarchies and people being able to connect and communicate more, business leaders communicating far more. And of course, as you said, HR has been very much at the front and center of so much of this debate of trying to understand how people are working and how they're working effectively, maintaining culture and connection and learning and all the things, and resourcing and recruiting, all the things that HR traditionally does, but then in this very different context. So what I would say is that I think going forwards, yes, absolutely, HR has got to step up, but so have we all. I think HR has such a fundamental role to play in shaping the future of organizations in this regard. But one of the most important things we've got to do is we're going to have to work harder to train the line managers. And then if I'm honest, and I've talked about this for many years, we haven't always done that well enough. We've often promoted managers because they're the technically most able or whatever it might be. But the reality of these ways of working require our managers to really work with their teams to deal with them fairly. So if I got somebody working from home, somebody working in the office, how do I deal with them fairly? How do I deal with the challenges of different choices that people are making about how and where they're working?
Yeah.
How do I deal with the greater diversity too? Because after all, these are aspects of diversity as well. How we work is an aspect of diversity. So all these questions require us, and certainly through the people profession and the HR function, to train line managers much better so that we can create these cultures that work for everybody.
Thanks, Peter. There's so many questions that relate to what you're talking about. I'm going to bring in, if I can, Anil Patel, who made a comment right at the very beginning before I come to Mark, because it links very much to what I think Mark is going to say when we come to Professor Stewart. Are you there, Anil? I hope you are still there. Hi.
Yeah. Hi.
Hello. Good morning. I was just interested in what you were talking about, productivity and the link between productivity and just work.
Well, it was a comment earlier about kind of productivity going up, and I just wonder how much time people are actually just spending time working now. I know I'm kind of doing longer hours. Normally, I'd start on my second cup of tea around now, kind of while reading through my emails, where I wouldn't have started working before 9 o'clock if I'd been going to the office. So I just wonder whether kind of people are now actually just spending more time, saving the time they would have been commuting, and instead kind of just working.
What is it you do for a living, Anil? Sorry, what kind of sector do you work in?
I'm a consultant in telecoms. Okay.
And your sense for yourself, is it that your hours have expanded, but potentially your output hasn't?
I think there's a bit of both, actually, and it's partly because I'm not in the office and kind of, I can do hours of uninterrupted work without people kind of coming up to me and speaking. I mean, I think this has been a really interesting conversation, and it's given me lots of food for thought about kind of my role in the future as kind of a kind of better manager of people and being available to people to provide them and kind of guide particularly kind of younger colleagues through this kind of new hybrid process and finding new processes which work for hybrid working and which kind of make sure that young people sort of and new people into an office get trained into the culture, kind of get better training and know how to kind of contact people in a hybrid environment.
It's very strange. We've had a couple of people join Tortoise, and we're a small team too, while we've been in lockdown. And I realized that last week was the first day I went into the newsroom for however many months, I can't remember. It was the first time I'd met a team member in person. It was just a really odd thing. We've been working together for months and months. I'd never met her in person. It's like strange that she had a whole body, not just a head, like I see on the Zoom call. Thanks so much, Anil. I'm going to bring in now, if I can, Professor Stewart, Mark, who is a sort of an academic in the field of human resources and management and so on. And Mark, and you've written extensively about lots of these types of issues, obviously before and now after the pandemic. The dream, as it used to feel, of flexible working, some people, Peter sort of mentioned, were, you know, so perhaps more mature people who sort of grew up in a different working culture were slightly anxious that flexible working was a euphemism for less working. And then, of course, we've had the experience we've all had, those of us who worked in offices were sent home. There are some dangers, aren't there, around designing a sort of hybrid, if you like, working model that can reinforce existing inequalities, that can put some people at a disadvantage. How do you characterize some of those potential pitfalls of what might happen next?
Well, there's many. I think it's also, without wanting to change the subject, I think it's also important to preface this that we'll be talking about a part of going back to work, because going back to work is not just about, do you go to the office or not go to the office? There's obviously been people who've been working consistently through the pandemic. There's many millions, more than 11 million people who've been furloughed who might not have any job to go back to. And organizations have been restructuring in this period when people are working at home. So actually, we're going to see a lot of different trends happening in the future world of work, not just this debate between working at home or going to the office and hybrid working, important though that is. So I hope you don't mind me making that point. I think it's an important one. I mean, in terms of some of the issues and challenges, I think some of these have been identified quite well already. So there's issues obviously around productivity has been mentioned, and I think it's not just about working more hours. I think it's also what we found over the last 12 months is that the intensity and pace of work has increased quite significantly. So I mean, I know this myself. I mean, I'm an academic with a lot of discretion in how I do my work, and I was able to work at home 1, 2, 3 days a week, and that's essentially where I did my work, if you like, what I saw as productive work. But the shift to home working has been a massive change in terms of the sheer volume of work, the intensity of work. There's a lack of breaks between one meeting and the next. It's just one Zoom meeting after another, and that creates a degree of fatigue. There's health and safety issues that are related to that. There's the blurring of home and work boundaries. We know that people who work from home tend to do more hours as well. They tend to do more unpaid overtime. There's also issues around surveillance and monitoring at work, which is coming through. So these are some of the challenges that I think have been widely discussed, and obviously different stakeholders have different views in terms of how this is going to play out. So that's an important point. I mean, in terms of, does it create more inequalities? Well, it does, to the extent that some types of workers are more likely to work at home than others. I mean, actually, we're talking mainly about a professional class of workers here. But within that, of course, you've got people with different home experiences. Certainly at the start of the lockdown, when people had to homeschool, we know that this disproportionately affected women and how they were able to do their work. I mean, moving forward, we know that there are issues in terms of the development of careers as well. People who work from home compared to those that are in the office have tended historically to have less opportunities for training and development and career progression and things like that. So this is going to be one of the, I guess, issues that organizations will need to look at in terms of how they renegotiate the working relationship between employers and employees. Will be issues like that. So if you're in the office or if you're at home, what does that actually mean? What does that actually mean in terms of the opportunities that you get at work, in terms of training and development, career development, this type of thing, in terms of how you organize your working day, in terms of when you get space at work, and many, many other issues. Of course, there's also a lot of a lot of issues around what your home working space looks like. And I think this was never really fully addressed. It's like you're either working in the office or you're working at home. But actually, if you're working at home, your home is your office, right? And that's a legal workplace. That should then be seen as a legal workplace with all the trappings, if you like, that come with that.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't really happen. It was enforced working from home. And let's see how it goes. Let's make a lot of it up on the hoof.
Mm-hmm.
Were home workers provided with the, with the right office equipment, with tables, with appropriate chairs, with even computer equipment? I mean, we know, we've all seen the pictures of people with laptops on ironing boards and things like this. But I think there's a new sort of issue there around the legal rights, or in terms of people who are working at home.
Thanks ever so much, Mark. I think like I say, this is sort of deceptively simple question with a lot of interesting, even into the rights and responsibilities space, the variance in what opportunities you get in terms of training and onboarding. Let's go there. There's a ton of people I want to come to. Sarah Cook, who is masquerading as iPhone, she's incognito this morning. So if my colleagues can find her, she is the person behind iPhone. And just before we move on from this question of kind of onboarding and learning, and I can see Yelena too has sort of mentioned when you're new or young in an organization, it's all remote. She feels a bit like a burden asking lots of questions. But if we can find iPhone person, that is Sarah, I'd love to talk to her about managing apprentices and things in this weird world. Are you there? iPhone/Sarah.
Hey.
Hey.
I don't know if you can. Hello, morning. I'm walking on my morning. I'm using the time to do my hybrid walking, so I'm being a massive lockdown worker cliche. But my question was around early career colleagues. So I line manage an apprentice, and I'm very aware that normally we'd sit next to each other, she'd shadow me, and pick up lots of just kind of ways of working in an office organically rather than formal training. And obviously the formal training is easy to deliver remotely, but it's those less obvious, more organic things I feel like it might be more difficult to pick up when you're, working out of your bedroom at your mum and dad's house. So I just wondered if anyone had any great tips or experience for those early career colleagues who are missing out.
What's she being an apprentice in, the person that's working with you?
Social media. So, we should be digital. Right. So I work in a brand communications team. So, we do a lot to kind of create a sense of team and stay connected with each other. But it's more for someone who's never worked in an office. Just those kind of conventions of office life that we all kind of learn just by observing others use.
It's interesting, isn't it? There's the learning by osmosis, the behavioural stuff is very much more difficult to sort of adapt to. Peter's, I can see nodding. Do you have any insight from working with big organisations or small ones about how to sort of make sure that the bits around the edge are often the most interesting and invaluable bits of the training, aren't they?
Yes, they are, and so I absolutely acknowledge and recognise the commentary about particularly people just starting a new job and younger people perhaps, particularly when they're starting their first job. So there is a lot of that where you, as you said, you kind of absorbing things from your colleagues, you're watching and listening and learning and leaning over to your colleague next door and asking. But we've had these forms of working in the past, so it's not impossible to induct people. Obviously, we've had to induct people during this period of time, and to train them effectively. But I don't think anybody would say that means that it can all be done perfectly. Again, it's the whole point about hybrid and this idea of, and I don't think incidentally I'd heard the word hybrid up until the last 6-9 months, because we talked about flexible working and agile working and so forth, that, okay, so it's not about fully on or fully off, fully in the office or fully not in the office. I mean, I acknowledge what Tara said, but I think for the most part, people are saying, yes, I'd like to be able to get some access to the office. Particularly, I want to meet colleagues. We've recognized much more that one of the things that we most miss, actually university through the lockdown schools, is social connection, but it's true of office work as well. And yet you think of the paradigms of work, we're all saying, okay, well, when I was in the office, I used to be to chat to people. I went to so many offices where people sat in front of their screens all day long, emailing their colleagues two desks away. So I think this is an opportunity, even when people are in the office, to rethink the value of them being in the office, rethink about the importance of social connection, and about how they communicate with each other, and trying to capture those moments when actually I'm learning informally a little better than perhaps we've done in the past. So that we're really making the most effective use of the time when people are in the office, and then they can also work if they want to from home, and you get that mix and that balance, which is what hybrid's all about. But
Yes.
you know, I remember commenting, I was talking to Jonas not long ago, said somebody commented the day before in the press about, well, of course, the only way that innovation happens in our business is these so-called serendipitous water cooler moments. And they said, what did I think about that? And I said, to be quite frank, if your entire innovation strategy depends on that, you've got bigger problems to worry about than whether you're working from home.
Right.
Actually, again, so many organizations I talked to say, oh my goodness, have we innovated? Now, we've had to innovate for certain things, like our ways of working, but we've innovated in a lot of other ways. We've all had to adapt our business models in many ways in order to meet a changing need and a changing requirement. So as I said, I think in summary, I've long believed that we needed a stimulus to force us to think a little differently about the world of work. We've, after all, been working the so-called standard hours work, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, for generations. I think it goes back literally to people like Henry Ford. And this is a time for us to really rethink what work is about. And then to be able to look at people on what they are producing. So what we've also created in so many environments is a culture of presenteeism, where people are being judged by how many hours they're visible. And that's mitigated or worked against those people who've been working from home, which incidentally, or working part-time, which incidentally has tended to be more women than men. So these are all really, really profound shifts, I believe, in where and how we work, and creating a better world of work that's good for everybody, that hopefully is fair, that gives people the opportunity to work how they work best and communicate and connect in different ways. And that's got to be a good thing. But we've got to work harder.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to bring in a few contributions now, if I can, from the room. I'd love to talk to Zena Etheridge, just because I noticed as her name whizzed by that she's sort of looking after a really big team. And I'd like to hear some of sort of how she's tackling this whole thing. I'd love to talk to Tessa about trust and sort of psychological safety and how honest people can feel they'll be. I think Edwin McGarity has made a great point about communications technology and the paradox thereof. And then I can see just recently Ellen and Carl Burnett having a conversation about not so much who comes in and when, but what you come in for and how to think about that productively. So if we can start with Zena, that would be great. Hey, Zena.
Morning.
Good morning. Tell us a bit about your setup. You look after 2,000 people, did you say in your chat message as it whizzed past?
Yeah, about. So I run a local authority, and so we've had people doing a huge range of tasks, from running libraries, parking wardens, social workers, through to all sorts of other things. So we've had people throughout the pandemic who've been in every day, people who've been working from home every day, and it's been a really interesting experience. Our aim is to go back to all those people that need to be in every day because they're doing on the street tasks, obviously will be. But for others, I'm expecting people to be in 2 or 3 days a week mostly. And we've been talking to our staff about precisely those questions that people have been discussing about what tasks are best done in the office, or rather in a collaborative physical working environment. Yeah. What tasks are best done at home. And actually quite a lot of tasks my staff feel they can do pretty much anywhere. So they're much more flexible about them. I think that the kind of really challenging things we found over the last year are some of the things that Tara was talking about. Actually, how do you make sure the productivity gains are really productivity gains? Yeah. And how do you kind of create a culture where people really do stop at a particular point in the day, rather than just carrying on working and then generating more work for everybody else in the organisation?
And have you got any sense of how you account for that productivity? Because I share your kind of circumspection that what feels like productivity or output is not the same as productivity, but it's incredibly difficult. I mean, unless you work in a sort of, maybe there are easy ways to check productivity if you work in a call center and you can see sort of call rates and outputs and things like that. It's very hard, especially for a workforce like you have, where everybody's doing vastly different things. How do you know?
So some of our teams are doing some of those things. So in the call centre, or they are working through a kind of very specific caseload, you know, kind of how many people are coming in and making information requests, how fast are those information requests filled. For other things, it's much more difficult. You know, if you are working in regeneration and you're kind of working with businesses to try and make sure that, you know, the high street survives over the next few months and years, how you can't judge those people's productivity on any of those gains. So it's got to be much more about kind of team feel. Do they feel they're getting more done? Do they feel this is a more productive way of working? And how are our partners and our stakeholders feeling about our new ways of working? Are they feeling that we are equally accessible? Are they feeling that we're coming up with better solutions together? One of the things, the benefits we've really noticed is partnership working has really improved because it's much easier to get people together, and you know, kind of people get together much more frequent. It's much easier for people to get together for half an hour because you haven't got all of those sunk costs of travelling to meetings.
Yeah, great. Thanks ever so much, Zena, and lovely to see you this morning. Thanks for joining. If I can go to Tessa now, to talk about lots of this. Morning, Tessa, has sort of hinged on people saying, you know, communicating with my staff and figuring out what people want and what their preferences are, and so on, and just observing how it's gone and thinking, well, that obviously didn't work, and we'll try something different. But your point is about whether people feel that they can really say what they want.
Yeah, I think you know, I think within any organization, being able to create spaces where people can speak honestly without fear of consequences is always a challenge. But as our colleague Katie always says, data is just a rearview mirror. So whatever your pulse surveys are going to be telling you about what's happening within an organization at the moment is probably, you know, they're already out of date before the send button's been pressed. So how do you create spaces for people to talk? And I also think that the kind of, you know, the highly individualistic solutions that people have come up with to get through this pandemic, and the organizations have allowed to sort of, you know, happen because, frankly, whatever it takes, whatever works for you, let's get through it. When BAU returns and the overall and the sort of wider requirements of an organization start to sort of squash people's individual choices and wants, you know, that's going to be a point of tension. But it's going to be set against a backdrop, I think, of increased job insecurity. You know, we've already mentioned the restructuring, we've mentioned a recession that's coming over the hill towards us probably again, and increased unemployment rates. So how many people will bring their whole selves back to work in a way that they've had to during the pandemic? I think, you know, there have been so many wonderful, I mean, you know, sorry, within the context of a terrible thing, what has been rather kind of special to see is how much of themselves people have brought to work, and how much we've all had to be human and admit the challenges and the stresses and strains of what goes on outside of the office. And that sort of trust that people have placed in their employers, saying, look, this is who I am, this is what I need, these are, you know, these are my 2-year-old twins, this is my 89-year-old mother, whatever it is. People have been very open and transparent and bared themselves to their employees. So I think how employers then continue to create environments to sustain that trust and openness is going to be really important. And I think we've talked about that middle, I'm not saying middle management as in middle management, but that line of that layer of line management, which traditionally in a command and control organization disseminated down to the troops. It's completely different ballgame now for that management level. They have to know how to talk to people, they have to need to understand, they have to manage conflicting requirements and demands. It's a whole new ballgame, and creating the right support for that management community as well, I think, is going to be where you'll see the winners and losers and organizations coming out of this. And here endeth today's lesson, Liz.
Thank you so much, Tessa. And I'm loving the Brittany headset. This is
don't, my bloody speaker's broken on my laptop, so I've got to wear my can I take your postcode headset.
Thank you, Tessa. I think that the in the conversation in general about designing hybrid working, for sure, we perhaps under consider, and Peter did mention it very much, and Tara too, we engage with the team, we talk to the team, but the sort of whether or not people feel able to be honest in that scenario, and how long this feeling of vulnerability and, you know, sort of caring, sharing, empathetic management will endure. Truly, I don't know. I hope it is a permanent shift. I don't know. I'm going to bring in Becky Shaw, if I can, who's made a point about communication, but also earlier on you were talking, Becky, about, I think you're a social worker, is that right? Are you there, Becky? Maybe we can't find her.
I'm here.
Hi, Becky.
Hello. Good morning. I'm not a social worker, but run an organisation that runs adults and children's social work teams. And I think just to kind of reinforce what Zena said, I think particularly for councils, it's been a kind of mass. You know, we've had the full range of people, so people that haven't been into the office, like many people on this call, you know, for over a year, and the Christmas decorations from the year before that. Yeah. Which is odd, but I think, and equally for particularly, I think for the children's social work workers, who it's been really important to have eyes on, not just the children that we're currently working with, but trying to have a sense of the children that are what we would call on the edge of care, so the sort of the most vulnerable. And I think we've you know, there's some of the digital working, particularly with the youngsters. We've got around security problems with WhatsApp that have kind of dogged us for some time. So there has been some great sort of leap forwards. But I do think, I mean, for me, the point about working out how teams work together, they just need to keep on iterating it, because I do think it's different outside lockdown than in it. And I think one of the things that's interesting for us is that, because, you know, people are directly with their council tax paying, I've been interested how the public have got some very strong views about what we should and shouldn't be doing, which is sort of another dimension. So we're trying to, as people have talked about, wrestle with that. You know, what do we think the business needs? What do employees need and want? What do people that our customers want? And then what are the people that are sort of are paying council tax thing that we should be doing as well? So sort of, you know, triangulating all of that is a really.
I see. So you've got this extra dimension because you're a service provider using public money, and you can design it in a way that suits the people that work with and for you, but maybe the sort of beneficiaries, if you like, the users of that service would be less happy or feel. Are you saying that through a screen is less good? Is that the sort of general vibe?
I think it's just hugely variable. I mean, I think we have put services online in a way that we'll never take them off again. They've been fantastic, and that's been really helpful. But I mean, I work in a kind of a large rural area in Sussex, and people really want to know why we're just not filling the potholes. I don't know, there was a kind of an expectation that we would come out of lockdown and that all the potholes had been filled, kind of in the interim. So I mean, it's always that's always a kind of a dilemma. But it is interesting as we run into elections next week, that though, you know, people are expressing views not just about what we do, but how we do it in a way that I haven't seen before.
Interesting. Thanks so much, Becky. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to come back to Tara, because you just posted a point in the chat, Tara, about all of the things that you've implemented to try and keep in touch with your crew. And I appreciate you're a small business. There's 7 of you, is that right? So you're sort of a small business, but a very successful one. And I guess it's a very impressive list, all the things that you have implemented, and clearly you care about this. But can you possibly maintain that level of team love bombing when the world is back to normal? I just can't. It's a genuine question.
Well, the interesting point here is these things were in before this pandemic. So here is the point of difference. And I think, you know, Peter touched on it when he said, if your innovation solely happens around the water cooler, you've got bigger problems. I talk about this all the time. You know, I keep hearing people say, I need to get people back to the office for their mental health. Have you asked them? Have you as a business leader decided that people's mental health, your policy is around your people being in front of you? If so, your policy is terrible and you need to do more for them. And I think this is the point. And I saw someone talking about they had a part-time job over the summer, and actually the distance perpetuated poor management. And I think this is exactly the point. Lots of people have had to speed up the way that they do things, and it's all a bit of a mess because the last 13 months have been. If you start to put people and their needs and how important and crucial they are to your business at the heart of what you do, pandemic or no pandemic, you will find all of these processes easier. So things like I talked about in the chat, we have if I were boss for the day, which essentially was a suggestion box, it just looked prettier. And I decided to do it because I thought I spend my time running around every single day in meetings, doing this and this. And actually, what are the things that genuinely people in this business would find much easier, things that would make them happier, healthier, easier. So, something really simple. We had milk deliveries every day. We didn't get oat milk. That was something that bothered someone in the team. Quick win, easy. Interestingly, 2 years ago, someone said, I would love it if we didn't have a permanent office and we worked more flexibly. Lo and behold, your dream came true. Peter touched on, this is about choice. What I love and what I talked about is this is about levelling a playing field for the whole workforce, but you have to communicate with your team. Yes, it's easier for me, but actually I now only line manage one person in my team because we changed the structure, because I know I'm big picture, I'm brand, I like the creative stuff. I actually don't love the nitty gritty of managing someone, whereas my account director loves that. She's nosy, she wants to be in everyone's business. So it works really, really nicely, because then we have this kind of me, how is the machine working, and her, how are all of the cogs working? But I really think that is the shocker to me, is that people find this, well, remote working means I actually need to communicate with people. Heaven forbid you actually communicate with the people who spend so much of their time working for you and your goals. And if you're not communicating why you're all doing this, if you're not understanding, you can't fix it all. You cannot possibly fix everything for everyone, but at least be that ear. And I really liked what Tessa was saying about the importance of actually giving people that space to feedback, to feel like they can do that and there are no repercussions. We have our I got this reviews, which are just appraisals really, and there are specific sections in there. There's one about happy and healthy. We have loads and loads of mental health support. We give our team free counselling, all kinds of things. And it's really important for me actually in those appraisals. They're not just, well, how are you getting on with this task or managing someone? Yeah. It's actually, Peter touched on it before, and I know someone talks about this around that. It's not about work-life balance. It is that blend. It's how the two integrate with each other. And I think that is what this pandemic has done. We are all talking very personally. We've talked about the choices that work for us and our teams. We're also talking about a time we never thought, who would have thought they'd basically be forced in their house for a year? Those comments around connection and missing connection, well, yeah, we're all missing that. Yeah. And not all of us will continue to work in this way. I talked about earlier in the chat, in between the lockdowns, we were doing exercise classes together and working together once or twice a week. That's what the true hybrid working is. So I think it's easy to make this a polarizing subject because you either want an office or you don't.
But it's not.
But it's not that. And actually how we connect with each other now and communicate is not normal. But how do we take the good bit? Because I agree with Tessa, for all of the terrible things that have happened, I hope as a society and as people, we've had some massive learnings. I hope this does start seismic shifts in the way we do things and how we embrace change, because, Henry Ford was a long time ago and we need to do things differently. We are different people.
Thanks, Tara. I'm going to just take a few more comments, if I can, from the floor just while we're here, because there's lots of interesting things being said. I wonder, is Carl there, Carl Burnett, just because you were making some points earlier on about what tasks are better suited to what kind of environment, and you've been running, I think, big teams of people for some time. How are you coming at all of this, Carl?
Hi there. I think there's been a pent-up demand for more flexibility in the workforce for years and years, and so I think what we're seeing at the moment is the wind is in the sails of flexible working, and so in some ways it may be becoming sort of more fashionable to talk about the pros of the flexible working. And without a doubt, COVID came along and overnight proved to everyone that we can work in that way. And there are lots of pros and cons. And I think because there are so many pros and cons, it's leading to quite a sort of polarized impact. Like everything these days, everything is polarized. And I think that's led very much by individual preference at the moment, whether that's the individual preference of the manager or the individual preference of the team member, which is led by whether they're an introvert or an extrovert, or whether they have a family, or they're single, they're young or they're old, and so on. And certainly within our organisation, what we're trying to do is start now thinking about how do we make this less of an individual preference and much more about what are the activities that are required, what are the tasks. And so there will be some task-based tasks that are by far and away far better done remotely. Those sort of research-based, focus required pieces of activity, without a doubt, keep away from the office and be able to focus. There's other activities that I think is indisputable are better face-to-face, creative brainstorming, kicking off a new project, introducing new team members to the team. And so I think if we can focus on what are the tasks and which tasks are best suited to which environment, I think we come up with a better solution. The concerns in my organisation are much more about inconsistency and one person being able to work flexibly while another isn't, just because of the preference of that manager. And if we can agree the kind of tasks, then I think we hopefully can arrive at something that works better for everyone. The challenge is that's not now. We're as one of your contributors, Becky mentioned, we're still in lockdown. It's not yet. It's probably another 6 months or so before we're even close to business as usual.
Thank you, Carl. I think what you're talking about is really interesting because I mean, I'm old, so I've worked in organisations which have been, a wise person once said to me, hard places are happy places in relation to the working environment. And some of us who've been working for a long time are much more used to, I mean, Tessa called it command and control, but it was a sort of a very rigorous and very structured way of being, and you had to be there. And it did, to a certain extent, sort of, I learned behaviours where I had to be present, I had to be on my game, I had to be prepared. And that doesn't mean to say that a more flexible way of working necessarily changes any of that. But if you're sort of changing your MO as a leader or a management style to something which is about sort of empowerment rather than telling, it's a very, very different way of operating. And I sort of, there's a part of me that worries. And actually, I was a fascinating conversation with somebody who ran or does run, she's a CEO of a call centre business based in Wrexham. And she came out and said to me, I was doing a private thinking for Tortoise, and she came out and said, I want everybody back in the office as soon as I possibly can, because all my people are young. And they went home, we equipped them with the kit that they needed to do their jobs, and the productivity declined. And that is my product, and I can't live with that. So she said, and then she's going to means test it effectively as a benefit, that if you come back into the office and it shows that you do well, then you can try a more flexible way of working if you want to. And it was a very different way of talking, but I really respected her honesty, because she was kind of putting words onto something that I think is quite unfashionable to say. What do you think of that, Peter? It is unfashionable, isn't it? And we've seen very sort of senior people in very big and well-respected organisations articulate an unpopular point of view on this and come a cropper.
Yeah, I mean, I've long advocated that we've got to shift our working cultures away from command and control ideas and loads of rules and policies and all those sorts of things. Give people more voice. It's sometimes, Tess and I were just swapping messages. It's sometimes described as sociocracy or humanocracy, more democratic workplaces. Holocracy is another word that's been used. But in the essence of all of these ideas is to give people more voice and to trust them more, because so many of these environments, particularly command and control, basically the bosses were saying to their people, I don't trust you, so here's a whole ton of rules as to how you're supposed to conform. Now, again, I think this is something we've learned through working from home, and I've often remarked that if I come into a meeting with an organization on Zoom or whatever, I can't tell who the boss is anymore. Whereas if you were physically in an environment, you certainly could. The boss would usually be the one that turned up last, usually sat at the end of the table, usually leaning back in their chair, all those little symbols of power. And yet this has been quite an equalizer. We've all, somebody commented, we've all been staring into each other's homes, the cat's gone by, the children have come into the room, whatever. That happens as much to the bosses as it happens to anybody else. So it's humanizing work. And I think that's, if there's one thing that is most central to all of this, I think it is humanizing what work's about, and recognizing, as I said at the very beginning, that work is about people. It's about getting the best out of people, engaging them, giving them voice, giving them jobs that are worthwhile, helping them understand purpose and objectives of what they're doing and why they're doing it, and giving them more choice. And I think that's a lot of what we've been learning. And if that is the biggest cultural shift of all, from one where we have had still a lot of rather predominant command and control, Tessa was talking about middle management and things like that, to a world where we actually do give people more choice, more voice, and all these other things, then that's got to be a good thing. And that ultimately will drive another thing, which I think is so important in the modern world of work, is that we understand the output in terms of well-being. This has got to be good for people. How can we have working environments, which we've had for so long, that are not good for people, that are stressing them out, that are leading to problems of mental health and other things of that nature? I mean, it's incredible when you look at the trends. And I think we have a chance to really address many of these things because of what we've learned through this time.
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to go to James Harding, who I can see there typing away in his office with a serious look in his face. James was the person who said to me, hard places are happy places, by the way. So that gives you an insight into what my boss is like. What do you think, James?
So funny enough, I'd forgotten, Liz, that I'd said that. And when you said that, I thought, that's so right. Whoever said that.
What kind of a genius says that thing?
So I think, so I go against the grain of this, and I'm smiling looking at Carl because we work together at the BBC. And the reason I think there are a couple of things that are coming up here. And Tara, if you don't mind, I'm going to sort of go into against the grain of some things you said this morning, because I think, at least personally, I find we're a small company, Tortoise, now. We've had effectively the whole of our second year in lockdown, and there are certain things that you lose that are as important, if not more important, than the quote unquote individual well-being, which is the idea of a culture. What's the understanding of how an organization works? And the difficulty is that doesn't happen necessarily even in the one-on-one interactions. It happens in the group interactions, and it happens, I think, a good deal in the non-verbals, right? And that's almost impossible to do online. And so I've got a strong sense of the places where I found it actually easiest to work and seen people with very different personality types thrive, have actually been places where there's the strongest sense of what the culture and expectations are. And curiously, I worry a lot about how you manage people that you can't see. I'm really struck here by how many people are talking about how many hours they're working, right? I find it really hard to see the stresses in the system that you can see when you're all working in the office. So there's an element here that is, yes, the kind of command and control, whip cracking stereotype of the Goldman Sachs boss that people are seeing, but there's actually also a sensitivity about duty of care to people, which is really hard to do remotely. And so I think that Carl's right, there is a polarized debate about this, but actually I think everyone is aiming for something similar, which is a sense of how do you bring the best of yourself to work? And I'm more persuaded than I was 6 months ago that coming to work is really valuable for that.
Yeah. Thanks, James. And thank you very much to everybody, particularly, of course, to Tara and to Peter and to Mark for kicking us off this morning. I'm always staggered at just how much people really, really want to talk about this. We do think-ins, private ones with large organizations that taught us. We call them employee voice, where we sit and talk about this kind of thing and how people are thinking, work with organizations to try and design how all this is going to work in the future. And I'm staggered by how much this really, really matters to people. So thank you very much to you all for sort of carving out time at the beginning of a busy Tuesday, I'm sure, to sort of join in. There was so much useful interesting stuff in the chat that we didn't get time to hear about properly. Obviously, it is going to be a sort of certainly 3, if not 6 month kind of run in, and then who knows how it will evolve over time. I'm very interested in what Tessa said about the sort of thawing of the permafrost layer of middle management. I'm fascinated to see how the HR function evolves in terms of sort of influence and prestige inside organizations. I think that whole sector is going to have a very interesting evolution. I'm always completely fascinated about what Edwin was talking about in the chat about the paradox of communication technology and how much that actually means we might communicate with one another more, but the things we're saying are less interesting. To answer Sudi's comment just now in the chat, yes, we are desperate to get back to in-person thinkings, but don't worry if you don't live near London. There will always be ways to access thinkings digitally, maybe in audio, and we'll be planning a whole series of tests and pilots of things throughout May to see how best we can do the sort of face-to-face glass of wine chit chat as well as the digital engagement. Thank you very much this morning to everybody. Have a great day. We are back at lunchtime as always, 1 o'clock for Open News. We'll be talking about the goings on in Downing Street. So join us then if you can. Have a great day. Thanks so much. Bye.